I'd love to stand as respect for you, and I know that when you perform, you never sit, so let's try to be in line with the vibe of the music industry. I also wanted to mention before I start my presentation that you're all going to get a copy of the book at the end of this workshop, so please stay with us, and I hope that it's going to be interesting for you. So most of you know about copyright, and most of you know about intellectual property, and most of you probably consider copyright and intellectual property mostly as legal categories, as rights. So you think that we will be talking only about rights. Well, this first presentation actually is going to focus the attention on copyright as an economic category and as an engine for the development of the entire creative sector or the creative industries or the creative economy. So what I would like to do in this first presentation is to focus your attention on some of the conceptual issues first. What is the relationship between creativity, copyright, creative industries, creative economy? To look into some of the economic fundamentals of copyright and to talk about the functions that copyright performs in the creative economy. Then I would like to turn to some of the empirical studies in this field. What does research tell us about that? And finally, I would like to say a few words about issues that still need to be clarified in the future, some of the challenges, and possibly the way ahead. So, let's start with the question, why are we so interested nowadays in the creative industries? Why is this becoming a buzzword in today's society? Well, the first explanation is that countries and governments are looking for new sources of development. Okay, some of our natural resources are depleting, others are changing their role. Is creativity going to be the driver of development in the future? In other words, if we become more creative, will it translate into more development? That's the first question why governments are turning to this topic. What are the creative industries? Can they be the driver? Secondly, creative industries, clearly this contributes to our social and cultural development. That is by definition. But are there any benefits that go beyond that? Is there anything which is more and above the cultural and creative side? Another issue which comes to mind is if we are creative, is that sufficient for us to have a good development? Is there an infrastructure which needs to support creativity? And what is this infrastructure? As you know, governments also like to talk about positive things. So creative industries is a positive agenda. It's not like talking about unemployment. It's talking about something which is optimistic and which is always very catchy. So all of these arguments seem to suggest that creative industries are becoming more and more interesting. But today you need to prove your case. So you need some empirical research to prove all of the above. Now, intellectual property and creativity, you see, I cannot tell you that without intellectual property there's no creativity. This is not true. Creativity has existed throughout the existence of mankind, and there have been great periods in history when there was a lot of creativity and there was no intellectual property. In fact, we don't know whether we are much more creative than our ancestors. We don't have empirical evidence to that. So what has changed? What has changed is that today we have, of course, technology development, but most importantly, we have established various kinds of conceptual frameworks. Intellectual property is a conceptual framework. As somebody said, it's a line in the sand. It's a conceptual framework, something that we have established. But what this framework does is that really helps creative outputs to be turned into economic goods and services. It helps us to monitor what is the supply and demand of creative products and we get indirect and direct evidence of the impact that creativity has produced on society. And indeed, today, intellectual property is becoming more and more something which countries are looking at when they assess your level of development, and it is linked more and more to the issues of sustainable development. Now, what is the creative economy? You have heard this term more and more nowadays, and I can guarantee you that you will not find a uniform definition of what is the creative economy. So most broadly, we can say that the creative economy, this is this network of relationships that exist in the knowledge society. The creative people, the creative cities, creative industries, creative economy, you name it. And it is a very powerful term because you link economic and cultural policy. It has a tremendous outreach potential. Those of you who have internet connection can check on Google how many hits you will get on creative economy today, probably about 30 million or more. And it is a term which is coming into use in our everyday life. There are various ways of defining it. There are broad approaches. When creative economy is the economy of the future, everything is creative. And there are narrow approaches when you choose one specific denominator, one indicator around which you build your definition. It can be culture, it can be intellectual property, it can be trade, it can be content, etc. So you heard all of these definitions which are built on a more narrow criteria. We in the World Intellectual Property Organization talk more about copyright as the organizing principle of the creative industries. Why do we do that? Because creativity is very difficult to define. It is a very subjective decision to decide that I am more creative than you. It's not my decision to take. And the lines are very blurred. So creativity is difficult to define. What about copyright? Copyright is a concept which was invented in order to protect and promote creative expressions. So what is protected by copyright, we know that it fits into our understanding of a creative good or service. And the nice thing about copyright is that it is well defined. It is defined in your national legislation, so you know exactly what is protected and what is not protected. Hence, I have an objective criteria. Where do I set the boundaries? Where are the limits? This is what I define as the creative economy, the creative industries, the ones that are protected by copyright. And as I said, copyright is very well defined. We know what it is. It is a set of economic rights over the exploitation of the works. It is also moral rights. It is the basis of very huge industries, and it is a concept which, in the end of the day, it works. It provides many people with a possibility to make a living. This is the topic of today's workshop. So if copyright is a legal category, can we talk about copyright also as an economic category? I think we can, because it has some very clear economic characteristics. First and foremost, it is a private property right. This is very important because only once ownership is established, then something can participate into an economic transaction. I cannot trade something if I'm not sure that I am the owner. So the private property aspect is a very important economic characteristic of copyright. At the same time, it has some characteristics of a public good. In other words, if I share this property, it does not diminish its value. You can all listen to a song and it doesn't affect the value of the song. So it is, in a way, a public good. Does it have some economic functions? Yes, indeed, it has a function, and the most important function is that it allocates value in property rights, and it sets the framework for the market operation. In other words, it gives you the rules. Here is how I can trade with my property. This is a very important function, which helps the creator to get what the market is prepared to pay for his product. Does it have any consequences of economic nature? Yes, it is a concept which ultimately leads to increasing of social welfare because it adds to the creativity and innovation in society. But it also has an important function in terms of redistributing income and cost. You see, if I increase the royalty rate, I am redirecting one group of income in society from one group to another. It also allows the owner of the copyright to exercise a certain limited monopoly because the owner can decide on the levels of access to the property, and he can decide on the price as well, which can be different from the market price. Are there any conditions which need to be met if this concept is to work in an economically efficient manner? Yes. Number one, very clearly, the consumer must value this product at a price which is higher than what I've spent on the production and on the dissemination, the distribution. That's very clear. But the second condition is also that you must control the misuse. In other words, if there's too much piracy, unfortunately, the concept will not work, and it cannot bring you back the benefits that it was created for and intended for. Now, how does this play out on the market? What are some of the market characteristics that we need to be aware? First of all, from the demand side, you work with creative products. That means that you're never too sure about the demand on your product. You create a song, but you don't know whether there will be an audience for the song. You write a book, and you're not sure if there will be a reader for the book. So unpredictability, this means high risk. It's always going to be like that. There's another feature which used to be important, especially in the past. Quality matters. Usually people would go to superstars, to megastars, they would buy more of these products. Well, today, with the digital formats, I'm not too sure that quality is the most important characteristics of demand. And certainly price is less important than before, because people today are not just prepared to pay any price for the product. They want the product anywhere, they want it in any format, they are not prepared to pay the price that you're asking for. So it's all about access. Things are changing today. What is the impact of piracy on demand? The effect of piracy is that many artists today are more reluctant to invest big amounts in recording because they're not too sure that they will recoup the investment, simply because their product may be available at zero cost before it reaches the market. What's happening on the supply side? On the supply side, the creative products are such that these are, as we call, differentiated products, which means that there is no substitution. I cannot replace one song with another because it's a matter of experience. I like this song. I don't want the other one. So it's different compared to the other industries. What you know is that you have very low entry barriers today, especially with platforms like YouTube. Your song is out there now. You don't need the same kind of investment that you put in an innovation research or in technology development. So the barriers are out there and your product is in the competition. The distribution of risk and income is very uneven. There's 95% of musicians which have a difficulty to make a living from one job, and there's 5% who own the 95% of the income, and these people can distribute their income and their risk into several products. So this is a very distorted distribution on the market. And finally, the nature of cultural diversity is such that there will always be more songs than what you can listen to. There's always going to be more books than what you can read. What does this mean? This means that you have excess of supply. The excess of supply, unfortunately, weakens the bargaining position of the creator. And that is why the creator needs elements of the infrastructure, such as collecting societies and other trade bodies which can protect his or her interest. Now, if these are some of the market characteristics, let's summarize what would be the most important functions then that copyright does in the creative economy. The first economic function is, of course, the function of an enabler. Copyright creates incentives so that you create, and it also provides a system of rewards. So it is also a market framework, as I said. It establishes the rules of the game. And to the extent to which copyright is an economic category, I can use it as a benchmark for economic analysis. In terms of the social function, everything in copyright is about balance. Balance between access, balance between property rights. So you have to make sure that society is okay with this balance. And everything that we talk about in Geneva is how to strike the right balance. But of course, through the encouragement of innovation, of social welfare, etc., copyright can be a catalyst for innovation, and it can help national development as well. What is the cultural function? The cultural function is mostly important to the fact that copyright provides you with a guarantee of your investment. Hence, it translates into more cultural diversity. There's more products that will be created, and copyright has this important role in terms of supplying of new content. Now, why do we measure, and why do we need to measure the creative industries? We live in a world when people don't believe everything that you say, so you have to come up with some proof. You need some data for that. So it is very important to make the case for any policy decision that here is what copyright actually means for the economy. That helps you to understand better the role of copyright. That helps you to see how this industry is developing, where is it going, which sector is going better than others, how are you doing compared to your competitors. And many countries, of course, use these studies as an awareness tool because not everybody knows well enough what copyright can do. Now, how can you measure and what can you measure? Usually, the smaller the object of the study, the better analysis you can do. If I analyze a company, I will be able to know everything about that company. But when you talk about copyright in macroeconomic terms, then of course you need to resort to different mechanisms. And you need to be very clear, what are you talking about? Am I measuring impact? Impact is the difference between before and after. So it's a very precise category. Am I measuring the performance of the industry? Is it going strong? Is it developing well? Or am I trying to get a snapshot of what it means in terms of the overall economy? In other words, what is the size of that industry? And this is what I will be talking about. Many of you work with music, but there may be representatives from other sectors, and you know that you can get different kinds of remuneration from copyright. You can get royalty payments, you can be a salary, you can be getting a payment from a salary, you can be getting fees, licenses, rights, you can be getting a remuneration right, or you can be getting simply a private copying levy. So all of these are different formats through which payments can be made. On some of them, you have statistics. On others, it is very difficult to get such statistics. Some of these rights are probably well operational here in your country. We will hear more about that. Others may not be so developed. We try to provide information on some of these rights on a global basis. But today, what we're going to talk about is the overall size of the copyright industry or the creative industry. And I will be talking in global terms because the next speaker will be focusing more on the national specifics. Now, the tool that we use for measurement has been developed by us in the World Intellectual Property Organization, and it classifies the copyright industries in 4 categories, and the criteria is the level of dependence on copyright. So for us, this is the central organizing principle for the classification. What we are measuring is only official statistics, what enters into the national accounts. So if it is in the gray economy, it will not show in the data. Why do we do that? Because we want to use the same framework for all countries, the national accounts framework, so that you can compare meaningfully the differences between countries. So we are producing these studies also on the basis, we're studying the economy from the production side. If you look at cultural studies, very often they tend to focus on the consumption side. But usually the data that you have on production is more robust, and it's always produced on an annual basis in a standardized framework, whereas consumption is often lead to subjective studies, and maybe they're not so regular as the production studies. That is why we look at national accounts data. Now, what exactly are we measuring in this type of studies? First of all, we are measuring the value of all the products, the goods, and the services that have been created in the copyright sector throughout the value chain. In other words, from the creation of the product until the moment when the product is consumed. So we're looking at the total amount of the value of these goods as a percentage of the GDP. We are looking at the employment that has been created. In other words, how many jobs have been generated. And we're looking at how much of the trade with copyright goods and services comes from that sector. In recent years, we have been looking at other indicators such as multipliers, productivity levels, real contribution to the GDP growth. In other words, if the GDP grows with 4%, how much of this growth actually comes from this sector? And in some countries, we have been able to do even more than that. Now, what is the picture as of today, the 21st of November, 2016? From 49 countries that we have done so far, the average seems to indicate about 5.16% of the GDP, which comes from that sector, which is quite a significant percentage, and many people did not expect this kind of significant contribution. They say, well, it's entertainment, it cannot be that important. Well, it is. It is more important than agriculture in many countries. Top of the list, we have countries like the United States and Korea. Down on the list, we have Jordan, Brunei, and Peru as well is not very strong in that. But about 75% of the countries are around the 5% mark. And here you have countries which are very developed, developing, and countries in transition, so this is quite representative in terms of the global picture. What about employment? Well, even higher, 5.36%. This is the average contribution in employment terms. And the list is topped by different countries, Philippines and Mexico. And down the list we have Thailand, Ukraine, and Jordan. Again, most of the countries are slightly under the 5% mark. Now, behind every study, there is a big report and there is a 1 year of work, so I can tell you all the details about any contribution that you would like to know. I would just like to mention here in this case that Mexico is a country where many copyright industries outsource production. So what this country gets is the employment. It shows up in Mexico. Maybe not all of the value, but the employment they do get. And I can tell you that employment is by far the most important indicator. Governments fall on bad employment data. So that's very important social indicator. So we can do a chart and we can map out the contribution of countries as per the GDP and the employment. And with every new study, we can see how countries are moving along this plot. So that's why it all makes sense to repeat these studies after a period of time, so you can see where is it going and where the others are going, so you get the full picture. You can look at productivity levels. In other words, how many workers do you need to produce 1 unit of creative products? And here you will see that super small countries are topping the list. The highest productivity comes from some of the islands in the Caribbean. Why is that? Because they simply have very low official employment in that sector. So whatever they produce with very little people. So that's how they end up on the top of this chart. And of course, down the chart was Mexico, which produces not so much with very much labor involved. Now, let's see how this compares together with the other macroeconomic indicators. You're all used to indicators such as GDP per capita. Now that we know what is the contribution of the copyright industries to the GDP, let's see how these two indicators relate to each other. And what you can see from that graph is that actually there is a very strong and positive correlation. In other words, countries which have a well-performing creative sector seems also to be doing very well in terms of the contribution of the copyright industries to the GDP. Hola, Juan Miguel. So, you will hear more about that from Juan Miguel in terms of Argentina. Now, foreign direct investment. Every country is interested in bringing in more foreign direct investment. As you can see, the relationship is even stronger. So the better performing creative sector in the country, the higher the FDI inflow in the country. Same goes for innovation as measured by the Global Innovation Index that WIPO produces. Same for competitiveness measured by the World Economic Forum. Same goes even for an indicator that tells you how easy it is to do business in a country, the business freedom indicator. Again, countries which have a well-performing creative sector seems to be doing very well in this indicator. Finally, a very sensitive indicator, freedom from corruption. It seems that countries with a well-performing creative sector also have less corruption practices. If you look at employment, basically the same kind of trends, only smaller relationships, but all of these issues, innovation, government effectiveness, corruption practices, property rights regulations, and GDP per capita, where these are going well, the creative sector also seems to be producing a lot of interesting inputs. We divide the copyright industries into 4 different categories depending on the level of dependence on copyright. And clearly, the core copyright industries, as we call them, stand for more than 50% of the total contribution. So let's focus on the core industries now. The studies from 49 countries seem to indicate that from the core industries, by far the biggest industry still is the publishing industry. In statistical terms, it's called press and literature, which stands for close to 40% of the value among these 9 core industries. It is followed by such industries as software, radio and television, advertising. Music comes 5th, and then is film. Of course, these are average data from all the countries. In terms of employment, same picture, even higher share employed in the publishing sector, 40%, above 40%. Slightly lower percentage in the software sector. The other 5 are following suit. So music comes against 5th here. Now, every country is different, so if we just put together the composition of the core copyright industries, I can give you this nice slide which we call the creative DNA, which actually tells you how different we all are. And you can see how the creative sector is different in all of the countries which are present on this scheme. Many people ask, is the creative sector the one where the developing countries can actually leapfrog and catch up with the rest? Indeed, as you can see here, the differences are not that big between the developing world and the developed world. So what can I say in terms of findings? It is a significant contribution, as you can see. It was unexpectedly significant. The dynamics in this sector is about twice, in some countries 2.5 times higher than the average growth in the country. It has a great multiplying effect. In terms of a study we did in Jamaica, the employment multiplier of the creative sector was about 6 times higher than a similar investment in the sugarcane, in the agricultural sector of the country. And this is important for people to make policy decisions. Where is the return higher? Now, there are lots of challenges in this, but I probably will not have time to go into that, or you give me a few more minutes. Thank you. What are some of the challenges that we are facing? I think that there are some misperceptions which we need to be very clear about. And I will name a few just. The first one is that creativity on its own can lead to development. It is not sufficient that the nation is very creative. You have to find a way how to monetize this creativity. Otherwise, it remains untapped. Secondly, there's also a misperception that you can have a very strong performing creative sector and forget about the rest. No, it is very linked to the rest of the economy. It does not function like this, that you can have an excelling creative sector and the rest is not performing well. Thirdly, there's one institution that can develop the creative sector. I'm sorry, but Gustavo, as strong as your institution is, it cannot on its own develop the creative industries in the country. You need to have a multi-sectoral effort, because this is a horizontal issue. It does not involve just one area or one sector. The next one, there's a misperception that the contribution of the creative sector is constantly growing, and our idea, our perception, our aim is to get the numbers higher every time. It's not about that. I mean, many countries do not have a straightforward performance. What is the point? I mean, if we extend the list of creative products, which easily prove that 100% of the economy is creative, this is not the point. What we want is to focus on what we are really interested in and to measure the real situation, because if it is not going the way it is, then there is a problem. So then you have to find out what the problem is. There's also a misperception the creative industries will solve all of our problems. It does not work like that. There are systemic problems. Some of the unemployment issues are systemic issues, and you cannot address them only with creative economy development. This is part of the solution, but it cannot solve all the problems. And finally, something which you read more and more about, there is a tendency also to call all digital industries creative industries. I think we have to be clear that digital is not a synonym of creative. So let's be clear where these boundaries are. I would like to finish by a few words about what, in my view, lies ahead. Today, the creative industries have become a very powerful concept. We in WIPO see more and more countries that are formulating strategic policies on how to develop their creative sector. This is a great moment, but this moment is not going to last forever. So we have to grab this opportunity now. In 10 years from now, there may be something else which will come up and will be the most trendy thing, but now it's creativity. We realize that creativity can help us to reach our objectives in terms of development. Let's capitalize on this extremely high profile of the concept. Many of the solutions are global, so we need to hear from you. We are hearing from others. We're not going to solve all the problems, but let's get a better idea of what people think so that the global solution can fit everyone. And something which we didn't speak enough about is, of course, piracy, and what is the level of acceptance in society that copyright is something which needs to be respected. You will hear more about that during this workshop. In terms of economics, what is the objective, and in my view, what lies ahead of us? The central issue is on how to monetize creativity. There is an abundance of creativity. There's more creativity probably than before, but how do you channel this into something which reflects into your economic, social, and cultural development? What is the infrastructure? We will talk about some of these issues today, probably not about everything, but infrastructure is very important. Without it, it cannot operate. And finally, once you do studies, once you're clear on where you stand in economic terms, you have to identify which are the drivers and focus on them. Maybe you cannot develop all the 100 industries that normally enter into the statistics, but maybe there are 5 which are really have a great potential for creating more jobs in the country. In terms of research issues, I think it's very important to continue with research. Once you see the figures, you realize what are the relationships, and it's easier for you maybe to take policy decisions. I think that we will very soon see a new generation of metrics which reflect better this very highly technological world and also developments of the economy as such. And I think the next level also is to be measuring more and more very specific impacts. I've been talking about a very broad picture. What is the overall contribution? How about the very specific impact of a broadcasting right in Argentina or of performers' rights in Argentina? I think we have many interesting topics to hear today, so I think I'll stop here. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias por la invitación a la Dirección Nacional de Derechos de Autor y a la OMPI. La presentación comienza con una cuestión un poco más contextual sobre el desarrollo económico para ir a un poco lo que decía Dimiter acerca de la métrica, una medición que hicimos para las industrias protegidas o relacionadas a los derechos de autor en la Argentina unos años atrás y que siguen siendo las vigentes. Por un lado, quería referirme a los procesos y conectando con lo que comentaba Dimiter hace unos momentos sobre los procesos de desarrollo en América Latina y luego ingresar algunos desafíos y algunas cuestiones que son relevantes de la economía actual para ingresar luego a la métrica. Voy a ir un poco rápido por razones. De todas maneras, la métrica, todo el estudio detallado está en nuestro sitio web. Hay una síntesis a cargo que presentó el gobierno argentino y hay algún detalle adicional que yo se lo puedo alcanzar hoy mismo a la Dirección Nacional de Derecho de Autor para que esté disponible para todos ustedes. En muchas ocasiones en América Latina hemos tenido problemas con nuestro desarrollo. Siempre consideramos que estamos subdesarrollados en vía de desarrollo y eso nos plantea un desafío ante el nuevo siglo y las nuevas formas en que se organiza la economía y cómo el ser humano se inserta en esa economía para poder alcanzar niveles de vida y de bienestar superior. Cualquiera sea la definición que tengamos sobre esa concepto, diríamos. Acá vemos, por ejemplo, cómo las economías de Latinoamérica crecieron más o menos a largo plazo, como crecieron el resto del mundo, medido como el PBI per cápita en paridad de poder adquisitivo, pero que nos podemos llenar de ilusión, pero cuando vemos cómo evolucionaron algunos países, puntualmente Estados Unidos o Europa, vemos las diferencias y las brechas que se abrieron a lo largo de los últimos 2 siglos entre el conjunto de la región y los países que hoy consideramos como desarrollados. Incluso cuando, que es algo relativamente conocido. ¿Qué sucede? En el resto del mundo aparece, bueno, África, otros países que se han mantenido en los niveles ingreso per cápita como los nuestros. También ha habido a lo largo del tiempo, en los últimos años, una cierta convergencia en los ingresos per cápita y el índice de desarrollo humano de los países de América Latina hacia, bueno, esto es lógico porque se tiende a 1, diríamos. Algunos países han acelerado más sus indicadores y vemos que aun cuando las últimas mediciones, no están las últimas, pero sí sabemos que Argentina todavía mantiene, ahora volvió a estar en ranking número 1 y de los de altos desarrollo. Hay otros países de América Latina que han convergido, pero todavía no se acercan los niveles de desarrollo humano de los países desarrollados. Es decir, tenemos problemitas por el ingreso per cápita como proceso de crecimiento, pero también con otros indicadores más complejos. Hay indicadores mucho mejores o más complejos sobre desarrollo humano que no trataremos en esta cuestión. Uno puede pensar que la América Latina, y eso incluye en parte Argentina o los países del Cono Sur, ustedes saben que Uruguay, Argentina y Chile han mantenido los indicadores de ingresos per cápita y desarrollo humano desde los últimos 2 siglos siempre en los más altos niveles, con única excepción de Venezuela, que por el boom petrolero desde los años 20 en adelante logra un crecimiento exponencial en ingreso per cápita, no así en desarrollo humano. Entonces tenemos distintas etapas en la economía latinoamericana, pero siempre ha estado, salvo algún periodo, donde en algunos países, como pudo haber sido México, Brasil, Argentina, dominado por cierto proceso de industrialización, en general ha tenido una cierta dominancia la presencia de los recursos naturales y con las persistencias a nivel de desigualdad humana, territorial. Lo que sí hemos encontrado en los últimos tiempos, en el cual se basa nuestro estudio, es que se hizo en el marco de un boom de commodities con todas las cosas positivas, pero también los resultados, a veces los efectos negativos del boom de commodities y políticas sociales más inclusivas. Y algún aspecto que no corresponde a este auditorio, pero que en gran parte de estos países mantuvieron políticas macroeconómicas mucho más sanas, lo cual ayuda a mantener y generar otras expectativas para la población y desarrollo de sectores más complejos, como pueden ser los de la industria creativa. Hay también algún rasgo que tiene que ver con este último tiempo, sobre el cual se inserta nuestro estudio, y es el cambio que algunos consideramos que se está dando en la forma en que la gente se organiza para trabajar, qué tipos de trabajos se realizan y qué tipo de productos son el resultado de estos nuevos cambios en la organización del trabajo. Daría la impresión que el hombre siempre se las arregló para, con su ingenio, resolver las restricciones. En un momento nos enfrentamos a restricciones y hemos ido resolviendo. A veces las resoluciones en general han sido positivas, pero a veces han tenido costos o efectos negativos secundarios. Pero sí hemos visto también que hay cuestiones que hemos usado para resolver estas restricciones. Es interesante, además de los nuevos productos que hemos sacado a la luz de nuestra creatividad como mecanismo de proceso de desarrollo a largo plazo. Yo voy a pasar, por ejemplo, acá, ¿qué usábamos y qué usamos hoy? Esto está en un artículo que yo se lo voy a facilitar a la Dirección Nacional para aquellos que lo quieren leer un poquito más detalladamente. Antes, diríamos, en un periodo dominado, supongamos en el siglo XX, gran parte estuvo dominado por la materia inerte, diríamos, la maquinaria, el hierro, el acero, la energía eléctrica, etcétera, toda esa producción industrial tradicional, y daría la impresión, no podemos hacer, son cuestiones que están transcurriendo, están ocurriendo, por lo tanto no podemos definirla, que vamos hacia otro tipo de sociedad económica, donde los recursos humanos son más pensados en términos de capital, más que las maquinarias importan la información, cómo se procesa y cómo ese capital humano procesa la información. El trabajo físico es reemplazado más bien por el trabajo intelectual, no porque antes no hubiese trabajo intelectual, sino Aristóteles no hubiese existido nunca, ¿se entiende? Es decir, pero la sociedad en su conjunto tiende a darle más importancia relativamente a este tipo de organización y que este tipo de cuestiones con la forma que pensamos y trabajamos. De hecho, pasamos más de las cosas a conceptos. En cuanto a resultado. Uno piensa en un autómato de metal alimentar, una maquinaria, una gran industria siderúrgica, es la idea que uno tiene del país desarrollado del siglo XX, se entiende, Alemania desarrollada, es una gran fábrica enorme, llena de chimeneas, alimentadas por petróleo. Hoy más bien pensamos en la inteligencia artificial, redes, gente pensando de una manera, se entiende, hemos cambiado nuestra propia imagen de lo que es el desarrollo económico y los países desarrollados. Y esto mismo puesto de una manera un poco más desarrollada, ¿cómo lo hacemos? ¿Qué hacemos? ¿Qué usamos? ¿Cómo lo hacemos? De un trabajo mecánico a un trabajo creativo, de lo establecido y normado más a lo experimental, o de organizaciones duras, jerárquicas, a algo más horizontal, más flexible, lo cual no significa que se abandone lo anterior. Si uno utiliza este tipo de conceptos o de formas o de pensar la producción o la forma en que nos relacionamos en el ámbito de la sociedad económica para reemplazar todo aquello, estamos equivocados. Hay sectores económicos que tienen que seguir trabajando de esa manera. No hay forma. Incluirán algunos aspectos, pero no todos. Y hay otros que se guían más bien por este tipo de tipologías, ¿no? Decisiones circulares, proactivas, no lineales, se acepta el desafío, la posibilidad de que algo que se pensaba que iba a ser exitoso fracase, se invierte mucho tiempo pero fracase, porque aparece alguien antes con algo mucho mejor. Por ejemplo, el software es muy común eso. Y manteniendo el concepto de incertidumbre mucho menos sin control, mientras que en los sistemas industriales, por ejemplo, típico de la industria de los años 50, de los años 60, uno pensaba en el riesgo controlado por ingenieros o especialistas en la materia. Esto da la impresión que va más allá de cómo nos organizamos económicamente, sino que va a cuestiones más de fondo, diríamos, donde hay más el compartir o pasar a valores, a una idea de una cosmovisión mucho más amplia, como si una cosmovisión, algo local, es decir, una combinación de local y global, y no solamente lo local o lo nacional. Parece que está empezando a dominar, más allá de que cada tanto hay cuestiones que nos van sometiendo a cambios o a interrogantes, ¿no? Elecciones en un país, Brexit, etcétera, que nos someten, nos ponen nuevos interrogantes acerca de si este tipo de forma de relacionamiento social a nivel global es lo que va a dominar o no. Daría la impresión que muchos aspectos de esto se van a mantener. La idea de tener producción esparcida en el mundo, conectadas por redes, sigue siendo algo bastante poco desafiable por el momento. En este aspecto de las industrias creativas, uno se encuentra más bien, diríamos, sobre todo cuando nos paramos en el hombre, la mujer del siglo XXI, en el lado, diríamos, derecho de todas estas tipologías que hemos dado. Estamos sujetos al cambio permanente, a lo creativo, lo disruptivo, lo incierto, lo simbólico, la red, lo virtual, lo abierto, sin dejar de lado que aparece aquella persona, muchos seguimos utilizando los mismos instrumentos de hace 50, 60 o 200 años. Pero hay una impronta nueva que es interesante tomar en cuenta, y esto nos implica que desde el punto de vista tecnológico uno se guía, diríamos, por la innovación, más uno que piensa en las típicas sectores industriales, desde la agricultura, la producción metalmecánica, o las industrias creativas, es decir, aquellas a las cuales ustedes están directamente involucrados. Hay dos elementos interesantes en la organización industrial. Uno es la innovación, la generación de economías de escala, de aglomeración y demás, y la otra cuestión que es la diferenciación de producto. En este tipo de cuestión, donde el dueño de algo creativo lo diferencia del anterior porque le agrega algo que no había sido expuesto por otro autor, por otro innovador previo, es donde nosotros en este caso estamos parados con la música o con la escritura. Es decir, la posibilidad de generar algo distinto a partir del genio humano y el trabajo y de las interrelaciones con las cuales el medio ambiente en el que nos movemos, que antes no estaba a disposición ni nuestra ni de los demás. Y esto es una característica de toda la humanidad a lo largo del tiempo, pero que pareciera como que en estos últimos tiempos está ganando relevancia. Fíjense, casi no se ve, perdón por el color. Bueno, hacer más. Allá dice, para todos los ciegos, incluyéndome, allá dice hacer más, aunque no se vea. Hacer más. Históricamente, crecer, desarrollarse, crecer era hacer más. Más autos, más hectáreas de campo, más kilos de carbón. En ese tipo de procesos lo que importa es la cantidad, no hay innovación y no suele ser sostenible en el largo plazo debido justamente a lo que ya hemos estudiado históricamente en la economía acerca del proceso. La innovación es lo nuevo, el plus del ingenio humano es, ya sea en la organización del trabajo o hasta realmente una nueva idea de cómo un nuevo concepto, lo que permite crecer en el largo plazo. El progreso tecnológico es lo que permite crecer en el largo plazo. Por lo tanto, hacer más de lo mismo ayuda a corto plazo y en algunos casos puede ser que sea súper exitoso. No digo que no sea rentable. Sí, digo que en términos generales para una sociedad llega un momento que eso tiene su límite. Lo mismo tiene hacer mejor, que ya es un paso adicional. Yo puedo organizar mejor mi trabajo, hacer mejor mis presentaciones. Para la próxima vez propongo hacer una presentación mejor, pero no habré hecho algo realmente que sea un salto. Habrá sido algo marginal y pequeño en términos de calidad, ¿sí? Mejorar sus costos, mejorar la eficiencia, pero hacer algo nuevo daría la impresión que es el paso último que tenemos en los seres humanos, y es de pensar en algo completamente nuevo en términos de servicio o de bien, de buscar lo novedoso, algo que no existía sobre la faz de la Tierra, o algo que existía, darle otra simbología, otro contenido, otra relevancia. Y esto daría la impresión como la economía se ha ido y las sociedades han ido insistiendo cada vez más en este término. Bueno, yo voy a ir ya directamente a las mediciones sobre la Argentina. Esto para contextualizar por qué nos parecía relevante medir, como se ha medido en casi todos los países, a la contribución de algunos sectores relacionados a los de industria de derecho de autor. Vamos a tratar de ver aquí un esfuerzo también visual, porque había que poner datos en una misma planilla. Voy a ir a los datos centrales, si les parece. Por ejemplo, nuestra investigación ocupó, para que sea similar a la de otros países que se estaban realizando, se siguió la misma guía, las mismas pautas, se hicieron algunos ajustes específicos para la Argentina y se tomaron años para los cuales se disponía de estadísticas completas para realizar este tipo de estudio, lo cual no siempre es factible en todos los países, incluso en nuestro país. Yo quiero que llamen la atención sobre la última línea, es cuánto representa el complejo de industrias protegidas por los derechos de autor en la República Argentina entre el 2003 y el 2008. Pasó de 3,5 a 4,7% del PIB. Es decir, casi el 5%, diríamos, del PIB medido en el 2008, que hoy podríamos tener otro dato, está representado por este complejo de industrias. Industria se le llama en economía a lo que ustedes incluso hacen, ¿sí? Cuando uno escribe, se le llama industria, pero eso por una cuestión histórica de cómo se organizan las estadísticas económicas en el mundo. Estamos hablando de cuáles son los sectores, cuáles son todas las actividades, cuánto contribuyen las actividades vinculadas de una manera directa o indirecta a los derechos de autor, casi con el 5% del PIB de la Argentina. Es enorme. ¿Sí? Uno piensa, bueno, la agricultura, la industria. Dentro de la industria hay sectores, ¿sí? Cuando yo produzco un sintetizador, supongamos que lo produjese acá, está relacionado a nosotros, no necesariamente a la industria en general. Lo mismo ocurre con un servicio. Esto es servicio, acá hay un montón de servicios incluidos. Estos servicios están justamente anclados en una industria de derechos vinculada a los derechos de autor. Entonces, ¿cómo era anclarlo y diferenciarlo de otros servicios, de otros sectores productivos que no tuviesen que ver con el derecho de autor? Ese es el trabajo que se hizo. ¿Cuánto representa esta industria si uno mete desde la agricultura hasta el último trabajo de cadetería que tenga que ver con los derechos de autor? Ese es el trabajo. Todo ese complejo, de una manera directa o indirecta, casi 5% del PIB. No es poco. Por supuesto, las industrias principales son las que más contribuyen, porque son las que tienen el anclaje directo. Si publicar un libro, editar un CD, bueno, eso es totalmente, bueno, perdón si por ahí utilizo palabras antiguas. Yo ya soy antiguo. Entonces yo puedo hablar de la modernidad, pero soy un hombre antiguo para muchos de los que están acá presentes. Entonces, si hablo de soportes que ya no existen, bueno, que tienen menos relevancia, perdón. Pero Spotify, qué sé yo, ¿se entiende? Decir, todas estas cuestiones, bueno, es esto, está acá, diríamos, está anclado en los derechos de autor. Hay otras industrias que tienen menos vínculos. Estos, por ejemplo, son insumos. Cuando tenemos esto, por ejemplo, el micrófono está aquí. O industrias que prestan servicios mucho más indirectos, hasta las de apoyo. Por ejemplo, el transporte en general del país. El transporte, las telecomunicaciones en general, no aquellas vinculadas a los derechos de autor. En total, como verán, es casi 5%, y sobre todo que en un momento en que la economía argentina creció mucho, este no es un dato menor, en un periodo en que la economía argentina en su totalidad creció mucho, el sector agropecuario, el sector industrial, los servicios, todos crecieron mucho, y tasas realmente, ¿se acuerdan de las tasas chinas de crecimiento? Son estas. En ese proceso, estas industrias crecieron el doble, a tal punto que pasaron 3,5 a 4,7, el doble en general, ¿no? De participación. Esto indica que en un proceso de crecimiento, en aquel proceso de crecimiento, cómo evolucionaron de una manera muy exitosa, diríamos. Acá para mostrarles el promedio 2003-2008 en las categorías típicas en que se divide el PBI de un país desde el punto de vista de la oferta, pesca, suministro de electricidad, hoteles. Cuando uno mide, esto está todo dividido. Por supuesto que el derecho de autor interviene en muchas de estas ramas. los derechos de autor en su conjunto 4,1. Fíjense que, por supuesto, más que pesca, ¿no? Casi en el orden de intermediación financiera, no mucho menos que la construcción de todo el país. ¿Se entiende? Si para darse, uno enloquece por la construcción y los derechos de autor, las industrias de una manera, todos los sectores de una manera vinculados a derechos de autores casi contribuyen lo mismo que la construcción en la Argentina, ¿no? Es interesante.
Juan, 2 minutos.
Sí, ya termino. Gracias. Bueno, acá hay unas tablas que son agobiantes, pero que están disponibles para todos ustedes muy detalladamente en el estudio. Esto no tiene sentido explicarlo, simplemente que van a poder encontrar en el trabajo que publicamos cada una de las actividades desarrolladas punto por punto, cuánto contribuye. Esto es agobiante, que esto es imposible. Yo tampoco lo puedo leer, muchachos, así que no se preocupen. No es un problema, sí, nosotros no, nos discrimina, no, yo tampoco. Lo puse simplemente para que sepa que está bien detallado y hemos seguido hemos seguido la guía de la OMPI y las cuentas nacionales como la organizan los países. Si hay alguna actividad que no hemos podido distinguir como a uno le gustaría, es porque no pudimos realizarlo. También hay restricciones de tipo metodológicas. Creo que por aquí, bueno, estos eran los datos más importantes. Los puestos de trabajo, por ejemplo. ¿Cuánto representa en términos de laborales? Bueno, todas estas mismas industrias, todos estos sectores vinculados a los derechos de autor, hoy representaron en ese periodo casi 3% del empleo en la Argentina, pasando de 2,7 a 3. Habrán visto que el crecimiento de la participación en el valor agregado de la que genera la economía argentina fue mayor que el crecimiento del empleo. ¿Esto qué significa? Que en realidad lo que va a suceder es que va a aumentar lo que se denomina el valor agregado por persona empleada, lo que básicamente en economía se llama productividad. Si el periodo durante el vimos no solamente aumentó el empleo, no solamente aumentó el valor agregado del sector, sino que el valor agregado creció más que el empleo, por lo tanto aumentó la productividad. Algo extraño en la Argentina, porque ya las mediciones indican que muy pocos sectores en la Argentina a lo largo plazo han generado aumentos de productividad, excepto agricultura. Bueno, nosotros podemos decir que las industrias protegidas por el derecho de autor también. Lo cual no es un dato, por supuesto que mis colegas me dirían, vamos a corroborar el dato tuyo, pero este dato habría indicado que en este periodo ocurrió eso, junto con otro sector puntualmente que es agricultura. Bueno, digo, para cerrar, tengo 2 minutos. 30 segundos. Las industrias tienen una alta representación. Este sector, en su complejo, todo un complejo, representa casi un 5% del PBI, emplea un montón de mano de obra. Es un sector que ha sido dinámico en el crecimiento, en la generación de mano de obra y en la productividad, lo cual no es poco, y que ha estado, diríamos, al tope en cuanto a los complejos económicos de la República Argentina en el mismo periodo. Un periodo que no ha sido menor, porque es un periodo de fuerte crecimiento. Y por lo tanto, si en un periodo de fuerte crecimiento vos te destacás, significa que has dado un plus por encima de lo que fueron las tasas chinas. Se ve este punto que es un detalle no trivial para este sector económico, tal como lo midemos no desde el punto de vista cultural, que es lo más importante, sino desde la métrica económica. Y bueno, y por lo tanto uno espera que próximas mediciones nos den nuevas satisfacciones en términos de contribución al valor agregado, al empleo y a la productividad, que hoy está tan en discusión en todo el mundo. Muchas gracias.